Hello, welcome to another edition of the Pace Report, reporting live here at Walker's here in New York City. In a career spanning over 50 years, guitarist Peter Leitch has created something that is very deep and very personal. In addition to not just playing the guitar as well as his photographs, but he wrote a book called Off the Books, which chronicles 50 years as an up-and-coming jazz artist growing up in Montreal, as well as playing in Toronto, Canada, where he developed a name for himself both here and abroad, as well as him segueing here to the New York jazz scene 30 years ago. We sat down and we talked about the nucleus of this brand new book, and we also talked about this brand new record that he recorded back in 1999 with the great John Hicks at California State University, which has been in the archives, and he decided to really put this out to tie in the brand new book Off the Books. So sit back, relax, enjoy the sounds of Mr. Peter Leitch live here at Walker's here in New York City. Peter, congratulations on this brand new autobiography Off the Books, as well as your brand new CD. Seems like you are really trying to put a whole new perspective of the life that you lived as a jazz musician.
Well, I mean, the book started out where I just tried to write down a number of things that I had experienced and remembered, and I just wanted to get it on paper while I still had a memory, you know. And it kind of developed into a story.
Being a Canadian who really kind of was exposed to jazz via records and the local scene in Montreal, and now you've evolved into this international jazz guitarist, how do you feel now about yourself as a guitarist and as a photographer now?
Well, first of all, I was very lucky in Montreal, and at the time that I started listening to this music, I was exposed to it. Montreal was on the circuit, so I got to hear everybody coming through town. And I heard the Miles Davis Sextet with Hank Mobley and J.J. Johnson and Wynton Kelly and Paul Chambers and Jimmy Cobb. I heard the classic Coltrane Quartet, and a number of great players were coming through town as a single, working with local musicians. I mean, I got to hear Jimmy Heath, Pepper Adams, Sonny Stitt, and Jackie McLean. All these people were coming through town. So you know, you heard them on records, and then you'd go down to the club and hear them live. And it was really like a golden age. It was right there before my eyes and ears, you know. So I felt this really helped me evolve and made me want to move to New York, of course, you know, which I did much later in life. But I've been here 30 years now, and I'm just fortunate in that I've been able to play with a lot of great players, people who influenced me and helped me along. So I feel I've kind of, you know, developed into a voice, and I just have to keep working on it and keep developing it.
You know, as a musician in Canada, what were some of the most important influences in your life? Who were some of the people that you saw and interacted with daily, as well as the people that you listened to on radio and record?
Well, there were some great guitarists around Montreal at that time. There was a phenomenal guitarist named Nelson Simons, who played every night at a place called the Black Bottom. And he was just phenomenal. He scared the hell out of Wes Montgomery, you know. Well, in fact, I think Wes talked about him in an interview. And he was one of the people, and also his cousin, who was also a great guitarist. His name was Ivan Simons, and he kind of took me under his wing and, you know, was kind of a mentor. And then a little later on, Sadiq Hakim, the pianist, lived in Montreal for a while, and a great tenor saxophonist named Billy Robinson, who was originally from Texas, and he'd worked with Mingus and Freddie Hubbard, and he ended up marrying a Canadian woman and moved to Montreal. So these people were very, very important to my development. They were sort of mentors. And
playing the guitar in your book, you described yourself as literally playing with the local bands, but also you literally transcribed a lot of the jazz records that you were buying, especially playing on.
Yeah, absolutely. I transcribed a lot of saxophone players and trumpet players, as well as guitar players. And piano players actually were very important too, although I don't play piano at all. But, you know, all the great piano players I listened to, like Bud Powell and McCoy Tyner and Bill Evans, and, you know, all of it.
Coming to the United States from Montreal by way of Toronto, you kind of, for the first 2 years of your life here, you kind of, it was sink or swim, and you decided to swim.
Yeah, I didn't really have any choice because I just felt that I didn't want to go back to Canada, and I just had to get out there and do whatever I could to stay afloat. And I was very fortunate, again, in that I made a couple of records early on, and that helped sort of put my name on the map and enabled me to go to Europe a few times and, just kind of gradually build up something.
In your book, you've candidly described the New York music scene in the early 80s versus what it is now. Describe that very illustrious period of great jazz clubs, Sweet Basil's, all of those clubs, because you said earlier that there was a period when there were a lot of working bands, and now it's totally the opposite now.
Totally the opposite. Well, there were places like, as you mentioned, Sweet Basil, and of course there was Bradley's, which was a very special place. And Bradley's originally in the 80s just had piano and bass. And you could go there and just hear the greatest piano players in the world. And almost directly across the street was a place called the Knickerbocker Saloon, where also great piano players played. And I remember going into the Knickerbocker Saloon with barely enough money to order a beer, and just standing there, and right behind the piano, Cedar Walton and Ron Carter. I mean, music just did not get any better. And Bradley stayed open after the other clubs. The last set was at 2 o'clock. Sometimes it didn't get going till 2:30. So all the musicians would go there late after their gigs in other places. So it was kind of like an office for the musicians. And you get a chance to, even if the cats that weren't playing there at that time, you'd still get a chance to meet them and hang out. Very important, and there's nothing like that exists today.
John Hicks was a very dear friend and a great collaborator for you, and you have a brand new album that's come out on your label, and it features him as well as Billy Higgins,
David Williams,
and you guys recorded this back in 1999 at California State. Tell me about the importance of John Hicks. John Hicks played with a lot of heavyweights, and he also really was a very instrumental part of bringing a very unique voice to the piano.
He was really, he really was a unique voice. He was, he had a very special left hand the way he played, and his touch was completely his own. I mean, if you turn on the radio and you hear 2 measures of music, hey, that's Hicks, just a completely individual voice. And he was actually a very brilliant man, too. And he kind of took me under his wing, and we hung out together a lot, and he was just very, very special to me.
Tell me about your guitar style. I know that in your book you talked about how pianists were the ones that you kind of looked up to as far as how they influenced you. How did that incorporate into your guitar style?
Well, I would say pianists were very important, but also horn players were very important. And I really concentrated on creating lines like either a horn player would play or that a pianist would play with his right hand. Because a lot of the pianists were influenced by horn players too, like and Bud Powell and Charlie Parker sort of created that language around the same time, both on the piano and on the saxophone. And I kind of tried to transfer that to the guitar, like many guitarists do.
I want to talk about something in your autobiography about the climate of the jazz industry right now versus what it was about 30 years ago. You were blessed and still are blessed. The independent labels helped you out a great deal.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there aren't as many independent labels right now as there were. And I think a lot of this has to do with the whole digital downloading thing and people, burning CDs for their friends. And a lot of the smaller labels went out of business. And the bigger labels, which in the 90s were recording a lot of this music, they stopped doing it too, because it didn't sell their required number of units. I really feel that in the 90s they didn't know what they were doing. The people that ran those labels didn't know anything about this music. They had degrees in marketing, but they didn't really know anything about this music. And when those records didn't sell, they just kind of dropped it. So now it's like kind of every man for himself. A lot of people are releasing their product on their own labels. A lot of musicians are doing that right now because the other labels don't really exist.
As an educator, you are still holding a lot of clinics and teach at jazz festivals all over the world. What is it that you instruct in the younger guitarists, the young musicians coming up? What are some of the things that you suggest on the academic side, learning the instrument and the craft, as well as the business side?
Well, I try to concentrate on things that they don't seem to be getting in the schools, like how to interact with the rhythm section and how to listen and, how to relate to what the drummer is doing. And, because you have to play with the drummer. And if there's no drummer, you kind of got to be the drummer, And so I try to emphasize things like that, and it depends on the situation. It depends on the level of the people you're teaching. It varies. I have a few private students.
That'll do it again for another edition of the Pace Report, reporting live here at Walker's here in New York City. I'd like to personally thank the talented Peter Leitch for his time, as well as the staff and management here at Walker's. As always, please visit my website, www.thepacereport.com, for my weekly column as well as my past segments. Till next time, remember, if it's in the groove, it'll make you move. Till next time, peace.